I was at a loose end, and it was a good neighbour of ours who had worked at the studios for many years. He was a charge hand painter, and he was also a bit of a bigwig in the union. And in those days, it was a catch-22. You couldn't get a job if you didn't have a ticket, and to get a ticket, you had to have a job. So anyway, cut a long story short, he said, don't worry about that, I can get you in, and once you're in, at the next branch meeting, I'll propose you and you get your NATKY ticket. And that was what happened. When I started there, Oliver, the big musical with Ron Moody, Oliver Reed, Jack Wilde, Mark Lester, Shaney Wallace, Harry Seacombe was proposed to start shooting at the end of that year. In actual fact, it was a massive studio construction. They took virtually the whole of Shepperton Studios over, and there was something, I would think, like 450 various craftsmen working on it, something like 130, 140 carpenters. There was all the trades, and it was absolutely, it was an eye-opener. And within the studios, they created a full mock-up of Bloomsbury Square with all the cobblestones. It was a massive, massive facade with certain doors and windows with a practical back so people could hang out of windows and look. And all the sound stages, there were massive sets like Fagin's Kitchen and that sort of thing. And in the big, what we called the silent stage, which was H stage, it was like a massive aircraft hangar, and it had a huge bulkhead all round the bottom so that they could plug the bulkheads and fill the stage with water, so you could have boats in there. And that was used for the famous scene where Bill Sykes finally meets his end, and there's a big canal running through it, and The other incredible set was on the end of this huge collection of streets with shops and stuff. They put a bridge on the end, and we had a steam train that ran across the... I mean, it was unbelievable, really, what they did. And the entire film was shot within the studios. I don't think there was a foot shot on location. So it was, that was an incredible introduction.
So what was your role on that?
I was a stagehand. So basically, dog's body, on the stagehand's job with construction was dog's body. Helped the chippies, did a certain amount of basic carpentry. And then after I'd been there, I don't know, a year, 18 months, you get more into the job, and you get given the opportunity to go on standby. And that meant a standby that you were with the unit the whole time, and it was your job with the carpenter, the painter and the plasterer and the rigger, if you needed one, to the smooth everyday running of whatever the schedule was for that day. And the other thing that you would be required to do would be to put down the tracking boards, put down the camera track, and to just be available. You were you were there all the time, and they would just shout out when they wanted something or needed something, or they would ask you to be proactive, right down to if it was a moving shot or a walkabout, you'd be watching the rehearsal and you'd watch where the actor got to in the position on the floor, and you then went along and you just tapped a little baton on the floor so that he didn't have to look down, he could come along and he could hit it with his foot. Mm-hmm. So there was that sort of thing.
So hitting your mark.
Yeah, your mark.
Your mark.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And whereas a bit later on, when I was able to do a bit more on the camera gripping, what you used to have to do was you have to put your chalk marks down so that when you did a move with the with the dolly, you had to hit your chalk marks on the floor, because the focus puller during the rehearsals, he would have pulled focus on coming in on your face or whatever it was. So that was an important aspect of it all. But I worked on numerous films, some quite bizarre. Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter was one of the first things at the same time as Oliver, 68. That was a film with Herman's Hermits in it. I worked on Construction, A Girl in My Suit with Peter Sellers, Goldie Hawn. She was lovely. She used to sit there and knit.
And Peter Sellers?
We went...
what about Sellers? You're avoiding talking about Peter Sellers here.
Sellers, yeah, he was okay. Didn't, you know, yeah, he was okay.
But Goldie Hawn was what
lovely.
You see.
She was fresh from... I don't know whether people would remember it. It came from the States. Rona Martin's Laughing, and her and Ruth Buzzy were great. You know, fabulous lady. So she was lovely. Then we did a really brilliant location on another film with Barbara Streisand on a clear day, and we went down to Brighton and took over the pavilion. And that was a great earner, that was, because it was all over Easter, and we were all staying in the Grand. And particularly interesting little story in the Grand. There was practical joking was quite rife, and this particular guy really did like a drink. And this particular evening, we waited till he'd gone off with a couple of the other lads, and managed to get into his room, and basically anything that was movable we took out, and we spread it out amongst our rooms, took the light bulb out, took all his luggage out the wardrobe, the lot, as much as we could that wasn't fixed, we removed it. And then the coup de grace was somebody got a candle and lit the candle, and we put it under the doorknob. And when you do that, you get this oily black smoke goes on the doorknob, and then we all cleared off. And of course, he came back to his room, a bit the worse for wear. So he does that, goes in and he tries the light, and the light won't work, and then he can't find. Then he did that, so he's got it all over. And then he storms down to the desk. So that was a bit of a hoot. And things like, I can remember when we were in Marrakesh on Young Winston, and there was all sorts of hire cars flying about the unit, and somebody had the idea one night, I think it was a Renault 12 or something like that, to see how many people we could get in. How many people we could get in a Renault 12 and actually drive around Marrakesh with sort of about 9 or 10 people crammed into this Renault 12. I worked on one horror film called The Oblong Box with Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Sally Geeson and Alistair Williamson in it. And that was quite interesting. A lot of nighttime location on that, and around graveyards. So that was something a bit different, because most of the horror at that time was filmed down at Bray. Hammer had studios on the river at Bray, a big house, and it was filmed down there. So I don't know how it arrived at Shepperton actually, but it did. And that was quite interesting. Vincent Price was I remember he was a very nice man. Christopher Lee was a bit up himself. Yeah, wasn't so keen on him.
So looking back, I mean, you've mentioned lots of names who would be very familiar. Who stands out as people who you've got time for?
There was, I worked on Cromwell for a bit, only on the construction, but saw some of the filming. And Robert Hardy is a fantastic actor, And I can't think which film it was on though. Whether it was Young Winston, I'm sure it might have been on Young Winston. And he did this, not speech exactly. He was probably talking to young Churchill, and he was the schoolmaster, and he just rattled this thing off, just like that, with all the right emphasis and the right, and you almost felt you were sitting there while he wasn't exactly haranguing him, but he was very clever. I had a lot of time. I didn't see a lot of him. A lot of time for him. I didn't think much of Burton. He was in. I did Anne of the Thousand Days, and we went to Hever Castle and Penshurst Place, and that was with Richard Burton, Richard Harris, I believe, Genevieve Bujold, she was in it. That was quite nice locations.
And did you, I mean, in your position as working on the sort of set side,
yeah.
Did you actually get to rub shoulders much?
No. Well, you were there, you know, and it would depend, you know, on a lot of the interiors. If you knew there was a certain changeover coming up, you'd be behind you'd be sitting around, but when you're on standby, you're just there. So they come off a shot and come round the back and have a natter and Dickie Attenborough was very good for that, actually. He would always come and have a chat to the boys, whether he was directing or appearing in it. And I can remember once in Loot, the unwritten thing, don't walk into a shot. And I was behind the set, behind a fireplace, and I should have been paying more attention than I was. And suddenly I came out and cut, and he just killed it. He said to me, Ed, he said, if you're going to make an appearance, my dear, darling, he used to say, would you make it a little bit more dramatic? And nobody could say anything, and that was the end of it. And he was like that. He was, you know, and he liked to talk about football because he was chairman of, in the old days, Chelsea Football Club. Mm. So he'd get a lot of ribbon over because most of the boys supported whoever they supported, and so he was very nice. He was nice to work for and work with. And there was some real characters. Ron Moody was Ron Moody was a real character on Oliver. Ron Moody, if my memory serves me correctly, drove a battered old Vauxhall Wyvern car. But he would come in sometimes in the morning in his full kit, his Fagan gear on and his hat, and he'd come in, drive into the studio. I mean, I don't know where he lived or where he was staying, but yeah, he was really funny. And I'm just trying to think. One man who was really unimpressed with was Yul Brynner. He was really full of himself, and there was a wonderful story. Bit of an innovation in those days. All artists had the caravans, and they were basically, you know, the sort of thing you see on a building site, you know, but a bit more palatial inside. But no, he wasn't having any of that. He bought in one of these, and you would have seen them on some of the American film lots, these silver cigar-shaped fancy things, and had it parked in the studio. And over one weekend, some guys came in, and the studio is supposed to sort of, had security on the gate. Anyway, these guys came in looking all official, convinced the folks on the gate that they were official, hooked up and pinched it. And I never knew what happened over that, but they literally, over the weekend, they took this caravan away, and everybody, way. Liz Taylor, I didn't see much of her, but she was a good sport. There was a case where, I forget what she was working on. I did some location work on her. See, sometimes films would come into us as one thing, and then they would change the title. And this was called Z & Co. And it was Elizabeth Taylor, Susanna York, and somebody else. And we did a bit of a location up in London. And came back to the studios, and the Sparks that worked on it, they used to sort of, a bit of banter, and they said, well, when are you taking us out to lunch then? See? And she said, well, you tell me when then. So they thought it was still a wind-up, and they said, well, there was a nice fish and chip shop in Shepton. Said, well, we fish and chips. Sure enough, about 4 of the Sparks took them down to Shepperton and bought them fish and chips. So she was quite human, whereas Burton could get a bit. There was, I think it was. Can't think what it was or why it kept going. I think it went to 21 takes on something, and the old director, we just need to do that again, Rich. So he was getting, you know who I am. But yeah. But most of them were just
People
we're all doing a job, weren't
Yeah.
we? And though some were more important than others, it was the whole. One couldn't really function without the other. Somebody had to be at the bottom. In the main, it was. I mean, for a 21-year-old, it was an absolute burster, really.